Hello students, today we are starting with object-oriented programming using C++. So before actually starting with object-oriented programming basics and fundamentals, first we'll go through the background. Now the first topic in syllabus is foundations, which includes these things which are displayed: classes, objects, then different concepts such as abstraction, encapsulation, polymorphism, and inheritance. These are the basic keys of object oriented programming or OOP. Okay. Now, when we talk about object oriented programming, we must know what is a conventional programming technique which is used before this object oriented programming, and that is nothing but say procedure oriented programming. Okay, it is also called as POP languages. In POP, number of functions are written to accomplish the task. As the name is given, the procedures are written and they are calling each other. Now this diagram will give you brief idea about how this procedure oriented programming languages works. So there is a one main program which is calling different functions or procedures. Say in this particular block diagram, it is function 1, 2 and 3. They are calling other functions calling other sub functions, and finally the results are returned back to the upper levels, and the main program integrate the answers which are submitted by the various functions. So this is nothing but dividing our task into parts, implementing these parts as procedure or function, and then working on it. Okay. Now procedure oriented languages has some characteristics which are listed here. So the emphasis or the importance is given to performing the things, like performing or implementing the algorithms. Okay, so it is a technique in which the larger programs are divided into smaller programs or functions or procedures, and then the tasks are accomplished and integrated in later stages. So most of the functions in this kind of programming languages share a global data, a data which is common to all. Okay, so data is moving openly around the functions. So one data which is declared as a global is available to other functions also. This is how it is moving openly. And it employs top-down approach in programming design. So as we have seen previous diagram in which we have one main function which is calling sub functions in the second layer, then in third layer again these are divided into parts. So this is a top-down approach of implementation. Now, what are the limitations of procedure oriented languages? The first thing is the data is a global thing in implementation. So, data move freely around the program and are therefore vulnerable to the changes caused by any function in the program. So, there is no protection for data, no data privacy is provided in procedure oriented languages. So, it does not model very well the real world problems. So in real world, we have data limited to certain things, or data privacy is needed in many cases. Okay, there are some data which need to be private. There are some information. There is some information which must be shared with others. So this segregation is not there in procedure-oriented programming language. Okay, so this is the reason why object-oriented gain popularities. Okay, so object oriented programming treats data as a critical element, where as in procedure oriented, the procedure or a function is a critical element, or algorithm implementation, the actual concept implementation is a critical element. Now let us see this diagram. This OOP ties data more closely to the functions that operate on it. So what we are trying here using object-oriented programming is to represent the real world accurately, or represent the real world by using programming languages. So as shown in the diagram, we have three objects, and these three objects are connected with communication links. Okay, they are communicating with each other. Now every object has a data and operations which are operated on that data. Now we have seen in previous discussion that this data must be private as well as global. So here this data is private to that object. It can be accessed by other objects, but depending upon some conditions or constraints, the data is accessible. So this is the main key of object-oriented programming is the data and operations are binded together in a single unit, and it is called as the object. And these objects are communicating with each other to perform a certain task. So here, instead of dividing the main task into part, the objects are created based on the demand of the application, and then they perform operations by communicating to each other. Okay. Now let us discuss more about objects. So OOP uses objects as a fundamental building blocks, as we have discussed on previous slide. The fundamental block is an object. Every object uh, consists of a data and a function. Okay, so objects are the basic runtime entities. So whenever we are executing a program, after that execution or after that run, objects will be communicating with each other using messages. They'll be accessing or demanding data from each other. So object is a real world existing entity. So it becomes easy for OOP to map to the real world problems because of these objects. Okay. So it is nothing but an instance of a particular class. So here we have got two keywords. One is object and the other is a class. So let us see what is the relation between them. So this object consists of attributes, that means data, and functions or operations which are associated with that attributes. So we have seen that small circle in the previous diagram as a big circle here. So let us take one example by which you will be able to understand that what are the attributes. So now here student object is described in which attributes are nothing but student name, student ID or roll number, student branch, student semester, student marks. Every information which is related to student is nothing but an attribute. Now what kind of various operations can be performed on the student attribute are enrollment of a student, display information of a student, generate result of a student, and display performance. So this is one a simple example by which you will be able to understand what are attributes or a data and what are operations or functions around it. So this constitute a single object. Here the name of the object is given as a student object. Okay. Now class, here we can define this student as a class, and we can declare different objects of that class as a, say, art student, commerce student, computer student, electronic student. So these are the objects. So class defines, it is the abstract representation of attributes and operations, and object is the actual implementation or a specific implementation of a this class, a runtime entity of a class. Okay. So by defining a class, we are creating a new abstract data type. We are calling it as an abstract data type because abstractly we are defining what that object will contain. Okay, so class specification consists of two parts. The first part is class declaration, in which the type and scope of the members are defined. So type and scope of the variables. So as we can declare variables such as integer, character, float, you might have learned in previous programming languages, but we have to define scope also. So what is the scope of a variable or element or a member is whether this data is completely private to that particular object or whether other functions or other objects will be able to access that data, that we have to mention. So how to do that, we'll see the syntax. Okay, the second part consists of function declarations, as in we have different operations which can be performed on that. Even these functions can have a scope, say scope definitions, whether these functions are accessible by other objects or other functions, that we have to mention. Okay, now let us see class declaration. What is the syntax? So we are learning this object oriented programming as a C++ concept. So this syntax are totally say it can be used for C++ only. Okay, we are not learning it for Java or any other language, so it is for C++. So here the words which are indicated with red color are the keywords. Whenever you will start with the program, you have to write these keywords. So class, then we have class name. It indicates the name of the class. You can give student, staff, or any name which you like or which is related to the application. Then we have starting curly bracket and then a scope specifier. Scope, it the private keyword says that the variables which are declared under it, the functions which are declared under it are private. Those cannot be used by the objects which are outside this class or the things which are outside this class. Now, who will use this variables and function then? The members, the other members of the same class. So here we are declaring some members as public. So those are publicly available for access. So these variables and functions are available for other say objects for accessing it. Now these variables and functions will be able to access this private data of its own class. Then we have closing curly bracket and a semicolon. This is what the syntax of a class declaration in C++. Now these private and public members things are called as the members of the class. Then we have starting and closing curly bracket and a semicolon. This is a syntax, you must remember this. And private and public, these are called as visibility labels, okay, by which we can mention the scope of the contents. So by default members are private. So if I am not writing private and public keyword with this semicolon, then what will happen? The assumption is all the members which I am declaring are private. Okay, so public members have access to private data and functions. Public members are accessible from outside the class. This is the main or the key points which you must remember. Now this is the example of class declaration. So class student I am declaring. So here uh, the text which is indicated with the black color, you can change it or use it as per your application or convenience. So I am taking here example as a class student in which I am declaring private variable as roll number. So integer roll number, float marks, these two are the private members. Now public members are get data and put data. Get data will take input from the user as the information, that is roll number and marks, and put data function I am writing here just to display the information. I am writing return type as void, that means it is not returning anything. Return type of a function. So this is all about the objects and classes. So one by one we'll see. Now this is how to declare a class. Then we must know how to declare the object. So here creating object. How to create the object? Once class declaration is done, we can declare variable of that type and that variable is called as an object. So in this example we are creating the student class. Okay, so I can create object division 1, division 2 and division 3 as student space division 1 and a semicolon. As I declare other variables such as integer or character, similarly I can declare a variable of type student. So the student is the name of a class and division 1, division 2 and division 3. These are called as objects. So this is one way of declaring or creating the object, and the another way is given here. We can write class student, then starting curly bracket, some declarations and ending curly bracket where I can write the name of the objects division 1, division 2, division 3 and a semicolon. So this is the second way. So there are these two ways by which you can create the objects. Okay. So this completes what a class is, what the object is, and how to say write or declare a class in C++, how to create the object in C++. So we will see example also. Okay, this completes the first section which has an introduction to classes and objects.